The first 20 or so years of the 17th century are an underrepresented period of fashion among historical costumers today, but one that I think deserves more love and attention. It's a curious transition period between what we think of as Elizabethan or Renaissance styles and those from later in the 17th century. It's also the period when separate boned bodices, or bodies, start to become more common for non-elite women, as opposed to bodices stiffened with layers of fabric with attached skirts. These boned bodies were the ancestors of 18th century stays and 19th century corsets. Let's start with a look at the clothing of a common working-class woman. The first layer is a linen smock, which helps keep the body clean by absorbing sweat and dirt, and then being changed out for a fresh, clean one. On my head is a linen coif, which serves to keep the hair clean and neat, especially when working around hearths and fires. Covering the lower legs are hose made from woolen cloth. This type of legwear is simple and inexpensive while being nice and warm. After all, this is the Little Ice Age. My hose are a little bit baggy, but that's perfectly period, as this woman shows. My shoes are simple leather shoes with straps or latchets that tie on top of the foot. Next is a supportive layer consisting of a bodice stiffened with layers of fabric and an attached skirt. During the previous 16th century and into the early 17th century, the entire garment is called a petticoat, not just the skirt portion, although this terminology is beginning to evolve. The term kirtle, used in the 16th century to describe a supportive bodice and attached skirt, has started to fall from fashion. If you want to learn more about 16th century kirtles, check out my video Making a Tudor Kirtle for Anne Boleyn. This petticoat has a bodice or upper bodies made from herringbone linen stiffened with layers of linen canvas and wool interlining, and a skirt made of red wool baize, a lightweight woolen fabric. The upper bodies provide just enough support to uplift and secure the chest. A linen partlet is worn to cover the chest and provide a decorative ruffle at the neck. Partlets are helpful for keeping the sun off of your neck and chest, and to further protect the outer clothes from sweat and dirt of the body. Linen garments like the partlet and smock can be easily laundered, so the outer woolen clothes don't need to be washed and scrubbed. This partlet ties around to the chest to secure the back, and then pins in front at the center front and sides. The next outer garment is a waistcoat made from undyed russet, a type of woolen fabric often associated with the rural working class. It fastens with handmade brass hooks and eyes. I chose to make this waistcoat unlined with the edges bound in wool tape, based on a couple of tailor's bills from the late 16th century. While it may seem impractical to have a white waistcoat as a working woman, it's important to think of this not as white, but as undyed natural sheep's color. Not having to dye the wool saved the added expense of labor and dye materials. Cloth in the natural range of colors from undyed sheep's wool, which could vary from creamy white to gray to brown to soft black, shows up frequently in the clothing of common people. A blue linen apron helps to protect the clothing below it. Apron strings are also a handy place to keep one's leather pouch. This style of apron is simply a rectangle of fabric left ungathered and stitched to a linen tape, making it very easy to wash and iron. Finally, a straw hat keeps the sun off of one's face when working outside. This tall crown is a style seen in period images. Now let's head outside for the reveal. Even in a super humid Virginia summer, I'm pretty comfortable in breathable linen and wool. Moving up the social scale, we'll now look at clothing for a more middle-class woman wearing her Sunday or holiday best. I'm still starting with a linen smock and coif, but with knitted silk stockings and heeled leather shoes. Heeled shoes became fashionable at the end of the 16th century for both men and women. By at least 1620, boned bodies or pairs of bodies without an attached skirt had trickled down from the wardrobes of elite women and made their way to more everyday people. The petticoat is now increasingly made without attached upper bodies, and there are eyelets in the waistband that correspond with eyelets around the waist of the pair of bodies, so that they can be pointed together using points or ribbons with metal aglets on the ends. I find it's easiest to point the petticoat to the bodies to make one garment before putting them on. The waistband of the petticoat is tied together, and then the bodies can be laced up. This pair of bodies happens to be brand new, and this is literally my first time actually wearing it. So it could stand to be broken in a little bit so I can lace it closed a bit more. But this woman has a decent sized gap in her body, so I'm trying not to be too bothered by it. And here's how the bodies and petticoat look all together, with a bit of twirl for good measure. Over these support garments goes a gown made of black worsted wool trimmed with worsted braid. While all black clothing with white accessories may bring to mind stereotypical images of pilgrims and Puritans, black was actually incredibly fashionable during this period. It projected respectability and sobriety, as well as wealth, since achieving a true black from natural dyes was a more complex and costly process. Aside from mostly wearing black in my regular life, I love the elegant and chic look of an all-black gown with black trim. The mix of textures gives it so much depth. Black glass buttons close the cuff of the gown's sleeves. Separate white linen cuffs are basted or pinned into the ends of the sleeves so they can be easily removed for laundering and starching. Separate cuffs and collars are not only fashionable, but they also help protect the gown from dirt and sweat. This gown bodice is made in a style referred to as high-bodied in period written records, meaning that it comes all the way up to the neck with a collar, similar to a man's doublet. It fastens with even more black glass buttons, so we'll use some movie magic to speed this along. Also like a man's doublet, the bodice has interlining, padding, and a little boning to create a smooth fit. The white linen ruff is one of the most iconic fashions from the 16th and 17th centuries. I absolutely love making and setting ruffs, and I'm planning a future video all about that process. The ruff closes in front by tying a string through eyelets worked on both ends of the neckband. The neckband of the ruff sits inside the collar of the gown or doublet and can be pinned in place if necessary. I like to pin the ends of the ruff together to help create a seamless figure 8, but that is the only pin in the ruff itself. The shape you see is all created by starch and ironing. It's almost a magical process, and I think that's part of why I love it so much. This is a slightly more fashionable apron than the blue linen one, and is made of green worsted wool and trimmed with red wool tape, which also serves as the apron strings. Black worsted aprons were also popular. Here you can see I ended up making the waist of the apron follow the pointed waist of the bodice for a more flattering look. The final touch is a black fur felt hat with a silk hatband. Hats like these were fashionable for men and women during this period. And now, the complete look. I hope this video has inspired you to explore the clothing of the first quarter of the 17th century, as well as remember the context of this clothing. This period saw the acceleration of European colonization in America and the violent removal of indigenous people from their lands, as well as the first documented arrival of Africans in British-controlled Virginia that would lay the groundwork for centuries of enslavement. We cannot and should not separate historical clothing from its context, but instead acknowledge the difficult history as we learn more about the clothing.